Hey everyone, this morning I want to talk a little bit about the do's and don'ts of test taking. Basically in school, we are going to teach you concepts and make sure you are competent with that knowledge base. And one of the main ways we do this is administering tests, whether they are multiple choice tests, short answer, essay test. You're going to be exposed to a lot of testing in respiratory therapy school. So I'm going to break this content down into 3 shorter videos. The first video is going to talk about some test taking tips that you need to incorporate immediately as you're going through respiratory school. If you're in respiratory school, if you're not doing these things, you might want to think about starting to do them. The second video is going to concentrate on the 3 categories that the MBRC uses when they're asking test questions. So there's 3 main categories of questions on the TMC. And then the third video, I'm going to show you some very common types of test questions that we as instructors use, and we use these type of questions to mimic what we think the MBRC is going to use. So 3 videos. They're probably going to be a part 2 coming later on because there's just a lot of things to explore when we're talking about test taking. And I'll probably incorporate some more test taking strategies in form of a podcast. But this will get us started. So let's just talk about some test taking tips, what you need to do to know how to pass the test. So these are things you need to start incorporating almost immediately. So the first thing, know your exam. What type of exam are you going to take? And your instructors will tell you this. If they don't tell you this, ask. Because if you're taking a multiple choice exam, that's a different type of studying sometimes than what a short answer or essay is. Let me give you an example of what I mean. So the 2 most common methods of oxygen production are fractional distillation and physical separation. All right. If you're going to take a multiple choice exam, you will probably be able to identify those 2 if they're spelled out for you, right? But if you're taking a written exam, a short answer exam, and you have to come up with fractional distillation on your own, you're going to have to study differently because now you're going to have to remember that term and how to spell it or how to be phonetically correct with it, right? And that is a different level of studying. So you need to be prepared for what type of test you're going to take. You also probably want to use your lesson objectives, whether they're lesson objectives in the book that the test is going to come from a certain chapter, or if your instructor has given you lesson objectives, because really every one of the test questions you're giving should tie into those lesson objectives. So I tell my students, use the lesson objectives as a way to start studying. And then, so all of this, using the lesson objectives and the type of exams, you're going to incorporate that into your study plan, and hopefully that study plan means you're studying in advance, not studying the night before the test. The sooner you can go back and review that content after it's being delivered, the faster you'll get that content into your short-term and then long-term memory. So I try to tell my students, once I lecture on something, they need to revisit that content within the first 24 hours so that they're remembering it, putting it in their short-term memory banks. If they never look at what I lecture over, and I lecture on a specific oxygen therapy, and it takes me 2 weeks to lecture on oxygen therapy. If they never do any studying on that at all until the night before the exam, I can promise you they will not fare well on that type of exam. So you need to study a little bit at a time and study in advance. All right. And then during the test, if you have a multiple choice exam, as you're taking that multiple choice exam, you need to eliminate the distractors. Distractors are things that are probably wrong. So if you have 4 options on a multiple choice, I don't necessarily go down those options looking for the right answer. I go down those options looking for the wrong answer and get rid of them. What that does is it increases your chances of choosing the correct answer. So for example, if you don't know what the question is asking, maybe you didn't study that, or you didn't understand a certain content, if you can at least eliminate 2 things that you know are not part of the answer, that narrows you down to a 50% chance of getting it right if you're going to guess. If you cannot eliminate distractors and you have 4 choices, you only have a 25% chance of getting it right. So definitely eliminate distractors and eliminate options that are unfamiliar. Like if you know the content really well and of the 4 choices, there is something that you've never even heard of, that's a distractor. Get rid of what's unfamiliar because most of the time that's not going to be a correct answer. All right, so definitely start doing these things. But here's how you're going to fail an exam. So these are going to be your don'ts, okay? We don't want you to fail exams, so don't do these things. Don't memorize questions. Especially when you are at the point that you're about to graduate and you're thinking about prepping for the TMC exam. A lot of students sometimes take practice exam after practice exam after practice exam. All right, the purpose of a practice exam or practice questions will be for you to be able to determine where you're strong and where you're weak. And the fact of the matter is, if you're weak in an area, you have to go back and study the content where you're weak. Continuing to take test after test after test, you're hoping to memorize questions. And quite honestly, the TMC is a secured exam. So you're not going to memorize questions that you're going to find on the TMC. So don't memorize. Make sure you understand content. Also, don't cram the night before. I mean, yes, you can study the night before, but don't sit down to try to study 2 weeks worth of information the night before because you haven't studied ahead. Okay, that is probably the #1 reason people fail exams. And quite honestly, respiratory therapy school isn't something that we learn this content, we memorize it, we take the test, and then we dump it. You cannot dump this knowledge base. This is a knowledge base that needs to be built upon a very solid foundation. So you're studying to understand. You're not studying to memorize and then dump the content. All right, so don't cram the night before. Study in advance. You can study the night before, but don't cram it the night before. Because really cramming shows lack of planning and preparation. And last minute cramming, like if you're waiting till the last minute to study the night before, you're probably going to stay up all night or stay up really late, which means you're going to wake up the following morning to take that test and you're going to be mentally exhausted. You're not at your best. You're not going to do well. And then that quick cramming, none of that goes into your long-term memory. Chances are you don't understand the fundamental concepts if all you're doing is studying the night before and memorizing concepts, okay? So that leads to that lack of retention and fundamental knowledge. And you may get through the first semester of respiratory school doing this, and some of you may get through the second semester of respiratory school doing this, but when you hit that third semester and you're supposed to have all that content, if all you've done is memorized, you're going to have a really hard time completing respiratory school. So the goal is to study for understanding and study for retention. All right, don't let anxiety get the best of you. All right, so some of you are going to say, well, I have test anxiety. And if you do, I'm going to tell you this. I need you to reach out. Your campus has resources on how to deal with test anxiety. I ask my students this on occasion. I tell them where to go, and then we revisit it. Have you incorporated this strategy? Have you incorporated this strategy? And anytime they tell me, well, no, you have to work on certain strategies to overcome test anxiety. And that means really trying to implement those strategies. So if you reach out for resources, understand you got to do the work to get over that anxiety. It's not just simply sitting through a lecture and your test anxiety is taken care of. You have to incorporate the strategies. So reach out to your campus resources. I'll do either a podcast or a lecture on this in the near future to talk about test anxiety. But understand, it's natural to have a little bit of anxiety. If you're nervous about something or nervous about maybe you might fail, you're probably going to study a little bit more. So anxiety is a good thing sometimes. Anxiety during a test. A little anxiety is a good thing. That gets your blood flowing. That blood flows through your brain. You can think better. So don't think you're not going to have anxiety. A little bit is acceptable. Okay, now if you've tuned me out, start listening right now. All right? Never, ever, ever leave a blank answer, especially on a multiple choice test. If you leave something blank, there is a 100% chance you're going to get it wrong. Okay? Don't ever leave it blank. And you may say, well, I'm running out of time. All right, let's talk about that. Watch the clock and pace yourself. Okay? Make sure you know how much time you have on a test and watch the clock for that test. Pace yourself through it. Also, I will tell you to incorporate this. I want you to go through and answer the easy questions first. I never take a test where I start at number 1 and I end at number 50 and I answer those consecutively. I start at the top. If I know the answer to number 1, I answer it and I move forward. But if I get to number 1 and I think, I'm not really sure what they just asked me, or I think, I probably know the answer to that, but it's going to take me a little bit more brain power, I don't answer number 1. I leave it completely blank. And then I move on to number 2. So go through and answer the easy questions first. When you skip a question, mark it, but do not answer it. I have students that tell me all the time, man, I changed that answer. And man, I wish I had a nickel for every time in the past 25 years I've heard that. I could retire right now. All right, if you don't answer the question right at the onset, you can't change your answer. So don't answer it and come back and re-guess it or rethink it. Answer it if you know the answer. Leave it blank if you don't know it. Come back at the end, spend time thinking about it, choose one response and never come back to it. Okay? Don't answer it and then go back and double guess yourself and change. All right? So bookmark the difficult questions without answering them and return to them later. Now let's just say you're running out of time. You have 2 minutes and you've got 7 questions left. Guess. Okay? Don't leave anything blank. It is time to start guessing. But let's be smart about how you guess. Number 1, if there is an answer out of your 4 options that says increase flow, choose that one. Okay, I'm not saying it's going to be always right, but I am saying a lot of troubleshooting things in respiratory care, a lot of equipment that we utilize can be fixed by increasing the flow to that device. So if you've got an option to increase flow, choose that. As a matter of fact, there's a saying that goes, if you don't know, increase flow. All right, now understand that says if you don't know the answer and you have no way of getting to the answer, or you have to guess quickly, choose increased flow if it's there. If increased flow is not there, I'm going to tell you to kind of hedge your bets and choose C. Because for some weird reason, as instructors, as we're making a test, we don't like to put A as the option because the right answer is just right off the bat. And we don't like to put D as an option, and for some reason, it is just natural tendency to want to put the answers at C. So if you're going to guess, guessing C gives you maybe an increased percent of getting it right. Now, I know I do that. So what I do is I alphabetize all my answers. So it's truly random. That way I don't always put the answer as C. If I alphabetize things, it's not going to be C a lot of the time. So, but if you're guessing, that's a good strategy. Okay, so the next video that we're about to go into, we'll talk about MBRC categories. See you soon.